Welcome to week 2 of our academic writing. Today, we will continue exploring how to write stronger introductions and improve the clarity of our academic papers. A good introduction is like your paper's sales pitch. It doesn't need to be complicated. Instead, it should be simple, easy to follow, filled with examples, and clear even for readers who may not have prior knowledge. You can think of it like weightlifting. Before lifting heavy weights, you warm up with lighter exercises to prepare your body. In the same way, the introduction warms up your readers, preparing them for the heavy lifting that comes later, which might include rigorous methods and detailed analysis. Before diving into today's topic, let's briefly revisit some key points from last week. Last week we talked about AKL, which stands for Academic Keyword List, and how it can help us sound more academic. For example, instead of words like big or a lot of, we practiced using words like large and many. By the way, the Academic Keyword List, or AKL, is available online and it plays a major role in academic writing. I often tell my students that AKL is like a secret weapon. Remember the ALG paper we discussed last week? I went back and checked the abstract myself, and more than half of the content words came directly from the AKL. All of this is documented in my chat with ChatGPT. You can even follow the link to see exactly how it happened step by step. You might be thinking, why not just ask AI to give me synonyms? And yes, you can do that just like what this slide shows. In fact, I sometimes ask AI, what synonyms can you suggest based on AKL? But here's the thing. This AKL stuff didn't start with AI. It has been around for years and was built by researchers who looked carefully at academic texts. That's why it's so valuable. So instead of jumping straight to AI, start with AKL. Then use AI to explore further. That way, you know the foundation and you also get the flexibility of extension. Alright, so that was the warm-up with AKL. Now let's get into the real theme for this week. Here's the overview for this week's class. We'll start with the CARS model, how introductions are actually structured in academic writing. Then we'll look at useful phrases, sentence patterns, and of course, revisit academic keywords. The exciting part comes when we put this into practice. Analyzing sample texts, trying out the CARS moves, and even using AI to check and improve your own introductions. And at the end, we'll tie it all together with a summary. Okay, CARS model. CARS stands for creating a research space. When you write an introduction, you usually do 3 things. First, you highlight why your topic is important, then you give some background, and finally, you outline what your paper will cover. John Swales, a researcher from the University of Michigan, showed that most introductions follow these 3 steps, which he calls moves. Think of it like a roadmap for your paper. I sometimes compare it to an ecosystem. Your research needs to find a niche, a space to survive and grow, just like life does in nature. So let's break it down, starting with move 1, how to establish that space in the first place. So move 1 in the CARS model is really about setting the stage. You want to show that your area of research is worth paying attention to. You can do this by saying things like, recently, there has been growing interest in renewable energy. Machine learning has been widely applied in healthcare. Or you can cite a couple of studies. Several studies have examined language learning apps. Basically, you're telling the reader, hey, this is an active, expanding field, and here's why it matters. Incidentally, there are 2 ways to write this kind of introduction. One that doesn't rely much on citations, and another that blends the introduction together with the related work section. Alright, we now shift to move 2, establishing a niche. Think of this as identifying the missing piece of the puzzle. Academic writing often does this by pointing out what hasn't been studied, what's unclear, or what's limited. For instance, you'll often see sentences starting with however little research, or while previous studies focused on X, few have looked at Y. Notice how these statements create space for your work. By showing what's missing, you prepare the ground for move 3, where you present your own research. Okay, the natural next step right after move 2 is to occupy the niche, that is, you demonstrate how your study will fill that gap. In this stage, you explain your purpose, describe your approach, and highlight your results. For example, you might say, "In this paper, we present a method," or "Our method detects rhetorical moves." Notice how these statements show what the paper is contributing. The challenge here is to avoid simply repeating your abstract. Instead, use examples, talk about your input, intermediate steps, or outputs to keep it fresh. To deepen our understanding of move 3, let's look at an implementation case. Rather than summarizing everything again like an abstract, you can structure your explanation around input, intermediate steps, and output. For example, you begin with the input sentence. Writing tools help students improve. At the intermediate stage, the system identifies missing functional phrases or moves. Finally, the output becomes a refined passage that both highlights a limitation and proposes a solution. This practical demonstration not only clarifies move 3, but also shows how academic writing gains strength through explicit rhetorical moves. So far, we've covered the big picture of the CARS model. But how do you actually write it? This is where functional phrases come in. Think of them as your toolbox. For move 1, you pull out phrases that stress importance, like "this area is central," or that give examples of prior work. In move 2, you reach for contrast phrases, the ones that say "however," or "few studies." Then in move 3, you add in possibility or opinion phrases like "our approach may help," or "we believe this is effective." These little moves are what make your writing sound structured and persuasive, rather than just a list of facts. We can also take a closer look at one specific type of functional phrase: opinion phrases. These are used when the writer wants to emphasize importance or effectiveness. For example, to stress that the area is important, we might say, "Many natural language questions are submitted to search engines every day." Or, "An increasing number of services specifically target these questions." Later, when we want to show that our approach is effective, we might write, "By identifying moves in the submitted text, we can provide better feedback." These phrases guide the reader to see not just the facts, but also the value behind them. Functional phrases that provide examples can help as well. These are especially useful in introductions because they allow you to illustrate your point without sounding abstract. For instance, you could write, "Many student essays are submitted to writing tools on the web every day." Or you might give a concrete case. For example, Grammarly uses generative AI to detect grammar errors. Notice how these examples anchor your discussion in real-world evidence, which makes your introduction more engaging and persuasive. After examples, another powerful type of functional phrase is contrast. Contrast phrases are used when you want to highlight a gap or limitation, which connects directly to move 2 in the CARS model. For instance, you might write, "However, grammar error correction is not enough for improving learners' writing skills." Or you could say, "The best feedback is probably not just grammar correction, but rather attention to word choice as well." These contrasts show the reader what's missing in current approaches and prepare the ground for your own contribution. We just looked at contrast phrases, which highlight what's missing. Another trick you can use is possibility phrases. These are really useful because they let you say, "Our approach could be effective," without overpromising. For instance, you might write, "Learner texts may contain word choice errors in addition to grammar errors." Or, "These errors could be corrected more precisely with the right learner corpus." By using may and could, you're keeping your claims careful but still persuasive. We just examined functional phrases that shape meaning. Let's now consider sentence patterns, which shape form. Sentence patterns are powerful because they let you combine information in elegant and academically appropriate ways. For example, you can use a compound pattern to highlight contrast, or in a positive pattern to provide clarification without breaking the flow. These stylistic tools, when paired with functional phrases, allow you not only to persuade but also to structure your introduction in a way that is both logical and rhetorically effective. And if you'd like to explore more sentence pattern options beyond what I've listed here, you can follow the ChatGPT link at the bottom of the slide.